Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thriving Female Podcast. I am your host, Amy, and in today's episode, I want to talk about something I am incredibly passionate about and get incredibly worked up about, and that is gut health. Now, if you spend any time on social media or in the media in general at the moment, I feel like it's all over daytime television as well. Gut health is everywhere. It's people sharing their anti-inflammatory diet, their what I eat in a day. It's endless probiotic ads. Every influencer and their dog seems to be sponsored by various probiotic companies at the moment. But a lot of what you see online and in the media and in cookbooks and in from celebrities at the moment is either fear-based, so cut this, avoid that, you need this, or massively overcomplicated. In today's episode, I want to strip this right back. I want to talk about why gut health does matter, but why it doesn't need to be another stressor, another wellness chore. And I want to talk about what you can actually do to support your gut health and what things you can definitely put in the bin. Gut health is incredibly important, particularly for professional women. It isn't just about digestion or whether you feel bloated after eating your lunch. It is a part of a much bigger system. It affects how you function, how you focus, how you feel, how you live. Your gut plays a role in, I would argue, everything that you do in your energy levels. An imbalanced gut can lead to blood sugar crashes, poor nutrient absorption, and fatigue, especially in the afternoon. I think we've all been there. Your mood and your mental health as well. The gut produces around 90% of the serotonin in our bodies, which is the happy hormone, and it directly influences your brain via the gut-brain axis, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. When it comes to stress as well, poor gut health increases inflammation, which can heighten the physical effects of stress. If you're already dealing with mental stress, add some physical stress to that, it's going to make things a whole lot worse. Having imbalanced gut bacteria can also affect hunger hormones and increase cravings for sugar, for alcohol, for processed foods, which if you're dieting, it's not going to be ideal. It's going to impact your sleep as well. Gut health impacts the melatonin production in our bodies, melatonin being the chemical that helps us get good sleep. It also impacts our blood sugars, our nervous system. It impacts so much when it comes to sleep. It also can cause bloating, which is uncomfortable. Bloating isn't always bad, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but persistent or painful bloating can impact how you feel in your body and your clothes, and it can be quite uncomfortable. And also brain fog and focus as well. Poor gut health is linked to impaired cognition. That's a really hard word for me to say. Impaired cognition, mental fatigue, low concentration. So if you are feeling tired, irritable, puffy, foggy, constantly craving stuff, your gut might not be the only factor in this. It probably isn't, but it is likely part of the picture. And I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like, but I also want to begin by just telling a little bit of my story with gut health, because this is something that I have always been incredibly passionate about. I had a lot of health issues in my teens and my early 20s, and I won't go into all of them because it was quite complicated, but particularly in my sort of sixth form years, I was quite poorly, and essentially we went on holiday to Australia when I was 17. Yeah, and I got really bad food poisoning on the way over to Australia in Singapore. And ever since then, like literally that moment, I was really ill for about 48 hours. And from that moment on, I really struggled to eat a lot of food. Certain things made me incredibly ill. I couldn't process gluten for a very long time. I ended up, basically I couldn't eat any fatty meats either. I couldn't eat any fatty foods. I couldn't eat any pulses. I ended up having a diet that was very stripped back and very basic for a very long time. Went through a lot of tests. They thought at one point that I had Crohn's disease. I basically got to a point where I lost a lot of weight very quickly in a very unhealthy way, which at the age of 17 I thought was great, but really wasn't because I felt terrible. And eventually, after it must have been 6 or 7 years, I got diagnosed with IBS, and we got under control, and I had to learn how to take care of my gut during that time. And it was probably the thing that started my passion for nutrition in the first place, because during that time I was trying to understand what was going on in my body. I did a lot of research. I talked to a lot of doctors. I spent a lot of time testing things on my own body and working out what was going on, understanding what was going on. And it was probably, as I say, the thing that triggered my passion for nutrition in the first place. Nutrition was kind of how I got into the fitness industry. And it is one of the reasons why I get so irritated at the amount of misinformation out on the internet in terms of gut health, because I believed a lot of it for a really long time, and it probably made a lot of my health issues a whole lot worse. So I want to dispel some myths and give you some of the reality behind it, because I went through a lot of suffering. I don't want you to have to. The first thing that I hear all the time when it comes to gut health or health in general is that in order to have good gut health, we should be cutting out gluten or dairy. Just to make absolutely abundantly clear here, you do not need to cut out gluten or dairy unless you have been medically advised to do so. When I went through cutting out gluten, I was supported by a dietitian who is a doctor in supporting me to do that. And that was because they suspected that I had celiac disease at the time. It was one of the many conditions they thought I had. But unless you have celiac disease, unless you have lactose intolerance, unless you have been diagnosed with a sensitivity, or unless you are going through like a low FODMAP diet with a dietitian, cutting out gluten or dairy is unnecessary for gut health. And actually, cutting out whole food groups like this can reduce dietary diversity, which is what your gut thrives on. When it comes to improving gut health, a lot of people feel better initially when it comes to cutting out gluten or dairy because they cut out ultra processed foods or they increase their fiber, not because they've eliminated gluten or dairy itself. So for the most part, you probably don't need to cut out gluten or dairy. If you think you have celiac disease, definitely go see a doctor because that is a very serious medical condition. If you think you have some form of intolerance, talk to a dietitian, talk to somebody who is qualified to diagnose that and to support you through that. Your coach or PT probably isn't, FYI. If it is a medical sensitivity, but make sure that you are not cutting out major food groups. You might want to prioritize certain food groups, but do not cut out whole food groups because it's really not good for your health at all. The next thing, and I sort of mentioned this in my introduction, that I see all the time is people pushing probiotic supplements as a solution to poor gut health. Now, some probiotics are helpful in certain situations. Like after you take antibiotics, taking a probiotic is incredibly beneficial. Or if you have a certain condition like IBS, I'll be very transparent here. I take a probiotic. I take one that I have done a lot of research into and that I have spoken to experts about, and that for me and the condition that I struggle with and how I struggle with how my digestion works really well for me. The benefits of probiotics are strain specific. Not all probiotics are created equal. Many over-the-counter brands or brands that you might get in like Boots or Superdrug don't contain evidence-backed strains, or if they do, those strains aren't at a high enough dose. And most of them, if they are not bound in a certain way, don't actually survive your stomach acid, which means they never get to a place where they can actually have an impact. A good probiotic with a clear reason and rationale can be helpful, and for a lot of people who have digestive issues, and I should say here, like a lot of women struggle with IBS. It affects women disproportionately more than men. It's also incredibly under-researched, which is probably because it affects more women than men, but don't let me get on a rant about that just yet. And so a probiotic can be incredibly beneficial, but it needs to be a really good quality one. It needs to be one with a strain that is specific for the thing that you're trying to handle. For the majority of people who do not have IBS or do not need it because they've had specific digestive issues, antibiotics, food poisoning, that sort of thing, having whole foods, fibre and a consistent routine is far more effective and far more beneficial long-term than taking a supplement. The other thing that I tend to see a lot of on the internet is the idea that we need to detox or cleanse our guts. Now, I know that you know this. I know you know this, but your body already detoxes things 24/7. Your body has a means of getting rid of toxins. It does it by your liver, your kidneys, your lungs, and your gut. Whenever you take those detoxes, they are normally just things that are low in nutrients and fiber, shakes and drinks and things like that, that ironically actually harm your gut health over time by creating nutrient gaps, by damaging digestive processes. If your digestion feels off, you do not need to take a detox. So please, anything that is called a cleanse or a detox or markets itself as such, run as far as you can. There's also a lot of noise on the internet at the moment. I think people like Dr. Tim Spector and people like that are pushing a lot of stuff around fermented foods. So kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha. Fermented foods are incredibly beneficial for gut health. That is true. They do introduce beneficial bacteria into the gut. But they are not magic, and more isn't always better. If you enjoy kefir, I love kefir. I have it in my smoothie every morning. Have it. If you like kimchi, have it, but start with a little bit. Don't eat loads of it. If you enjoy a kombucha, fantastic. It's a great alcohol alternative, actually, because it is quite sour tasting. So it's a bit more of a grown-up fizzy drink if you want to have an alternative. They're all nice things to have, but do not have them just because the internet says they're good for you to have or that they are essential. Having foods like kefir and kimchi, kombucha, why do they all begin with K? I don't understand that. They are can be beneficial, but they also can cause some bloating. You know, they by having fermented foods, they might not agree with everybody's gut, and that is okay. And the final thing I wanted to final myth I wanted to bust, I guess, is a lot of the stuff around at the moment. I think it was a few years ago it became really popular, but I still see it online, around food intolerance or allergy tests. These tests that are like finger prick tests or hair-based tests, they measure IgG antibodies, which are basically inflammation signals, but these are not a sign of intolerance. All having a high IgG score tells you is that your body has been exposed to a food regularly. So I had a client once who came to me with an allergy test, and she was like, look, it shows that I'm allergic to fish. I've got intolerance to fish. And then I went through her food diary and I was like, well, you've had fish every night for the last 2 weeks. Like, of course it's showing up in your gut. The other one that came up for her was oats, and she has oats every morning for breakfast. A lot of the time it just shows that you are exposed to a food regularly. What these tests do, and I've experienced this with clients, is they lead people to unnecessarily cut out a lot of food. They create a lot of fear and restriction around eating. They create a lot of discomfort around certain foods, and they can create a lot of like bad energy and mood, and it can make people feel quite low because you can't have certain foods. If you suspect a real intolerance or allergy, you know, if you have like really severe digestive issues after eating certain foods, if you get like an anaphylactic reaction to a certain food, talk to your GP, talk to a registered dietitian who can guide you through the actual testing and elimination and reintroduction process, and who can properly test it. But a test that you got online that overcharged you to take some samples probably isn't going to be the thing that helps. So just a few myths I wanted to bust there. What is true, the internet talks about this a lot, and what is true is that stress and your gut are very, very linked. Chronic stress, which I think a lot of professional women experience, I think most of us in the modern world experience, but it's definitely something that is a fact of having a professional career. Chronic stress activates the sympathetic nervous system, so that fight or flight response. So when you are under chronic stress and you're in, I think back to a time at work, I remember where we were trying to get a board paper in, and it was like, we had like a week to get this paper written, and it was so intense. And I was in fight or flight mode the whole time. I was so heightened. What happens in these moments is your body reduces blood flow and down-regulates digestive function. So you have less stomach acid going around your stomach. You have fewer fewer digestive enzymes, and your gut moves slower. Your body digests food slower, so you will go to the toilet less, basically. When you are in that go mode all day, you know, rushing around meetings, multitasking, commuting, your body literally deprioritizes digestion. In the order of things that it is worried about, it is like, I am more stressed about this board paper and on getting home from work on time and on making sure that the house is tidy. That is more important to me than digesting food right now. It deprioritizes digestion because it has other processes that it's more scared about, it's more worried about. From a logical perspective, that seems silly, but when we think about it on an evolutionary basis, back in the day when we would feel that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response, it would be our body responding to like imminent danger that we might die. So it's literally going, well, I'm not going to worry about digesting because right now I need to run away from this lion that's trying to eat me. That's the response that we're dealing with. We're just dealing with it in a context that feels very very different now. So when we are under pressure, we are literally not digesting our food as fast, and that means that we might feel bloated, we might feel nauseous, we might lose appetite and feel our appetite get dysregulated when we are stressed. When you are also rushing meals, you know, eating on the go, eating like on a train, eating at your desk while doing something else, that increases symptoms like indigestion, gas, bloating, fatigue, even constipation. And that's all kind of something that goes along with being stressed. The other thing to really bear in mind, though, and I sort of mentioned this earlier, is that the gut-brain axis is a real two-way communication that involves nerves in our bodies like the vagus nerve, our hormones, our immune signaling, which means that when we have a stressful period of time, it affects our gut. So, you know, you might notice this if you have a really stressful couple of days at work, you might get an upset stomach. I often notice if I'm worried about something, I'll get an upset stomach, if I'm like panicking about something. But also when we have a disrupted gut, that can feed back into our mood as well. It can feed back into anxiety, low mood and poor sleep. Again, you might notice this. I have a very very real example of this. I went to Singapore again, actually. I've been to Singapore twice, and both times I've got food poisoning. I feel like maybe the country's trying to tell me something. I went to Singapore a couple of years ago to visit my sister, and I got food poisoning. And I was ill for like 12 hours, and then I was better afterwards. But for the maybe 4 days afterwards, I felt so low. I felt very anxious. I felt very down. I felt quite blue. I got myself into quite a dark place, and I can think logically now that it was my gut. My gut had been completely decimated by this food poisoning, and that was impacting then how I feel. And you can probably think of your own examples of that. So we know that stress and our gut are incredibly linked, and when it comes to professional life, stress is a reality. So taking care of our gut health and understanding what's going on in our gut is incredibly important. But what's more, there are certain things that we do, and professional women in particular do, that are actually really damaging to our gut health but seem healthy. One thing that I think we all do, and I do this myself sometimes, I'm going to put my hand up here, is having coffee instead of breakfast, or coffee before food. Now, in terms of like stress, like cortisol levels and things like that, there's not that much evidence that's actually true. But for a lot of people who have a sensitive gut, or whose gut might be easily triggered, having caffeine on an empty stomach can irritate the gut. It can mean that you end up needing to go to the toilet quite urgently. Some people find that having coffee is beneficial because it actually helps them to go to the toilet. So it can be a bit of an either or, but in general, it's not great for your gut to have caffeine instead of breakfast. It kind of doesn't feed your gut microbes, and it can irritate your stomach. So you're best off having a coffee with some food. The thing that I know that a lot of my clients do when they come to me, which is incredibly damaging to your gut, is skipping meals. So if you are eating regularly, I actually posted this on my Substack earlier this week. I talked about the best eating pattern for professional women, and eating every 4 hours is incredibly good for your gut. If you are eating irregularly, if you are eating breakfast and having big gaps to your dinner, if you're having lunch and then not having at 12 and your dinner, not having your dinner till 8, if you are grazing through the day, that is all going to disrupt your circadian rhythm, so impact your sleep. It's going to disrupt your gut motility, so the speed at which food moves through your gut. It's going to mean your hunger hormones end up all over the spot because your body doesn't know when it's expecting food. When that happens, it means that you can have your body releasing stomach acid at times when it doesn't want to be releasing it because there's no food there, which can cause indigestion, which can cause heartburn. You can get bloating from that. But also eating in a distracted way, so grazing at your desk, eating while you're working. I was terrible when I was in the corporate world of eating at my desk while reading the Daily Mail, because that was my one like little bit of like, well, I'm working but I'm not. I was at my desk at least, but I'd have like my emails on one side and the Daily Mail on the other. I wouldn't do that now. The Daily Mail was a lot less terrible than it is now. But when you are grazing, when you're eating distractedly, it can reduce digestion, because digestion starts actually before your food even goes into your mouth, with you smelling the food, with you kind of seeing the food. That's when digestion starts. And if we aren't digesting the food at that point, it can impact digestion further on. So being present and mindful around your food is incredibly important. Relying on ultra processed foods as your main source of nutrition is also incredibly damaging to your gut health. I am not one of these people who is religious about ultra processed foods. I have read ultra processed people. I've actually read quite a lot about ultra processed foods, and yes, there's a lot that says that ultra processed foods reduce microbiome diversity. They're not that high in fiber. They can be harder to they can almost be too quick to digest, so they don't give us as much benefit as we need. And they often also come with lots of sugar alcohols that can ferment in the gut and cause gas or bloating in some people. That's the case for me. There are certain sugar alcohols that with IBS I just can't digest. But for the most part, relying on ultra processed foods like protein bars, Huel protein shakes and things like that, relying on those as your main source of nutrition means you're not getting enough fiber in your diet. You're getting a lot of stuff in your diet that is going to be not very satiating because it moves through, it's almost been pre-digested, if you like, so it moves through your gut a bit too quickly, and it's not going to feed your gut microbiome in the way that we want it to. That said, you can still include those foods as part of a balanced diet. The kind of 80-20 approach tends to be a good way to go. The other thing that is incredibly damaging to gut. Well, there's lots of things that are incredibly damaging to gut, but one thing I see a lot in the women that I work with and the women that come to me is overly restrictive dieting. Because when you are having a very low carb, very low fiber, low fat diet that is very kind of, I eat the same foods every day, meal plan type diets, they starve your gut microbiomes, they reduce gut diversity, and they ultimately aren't particularly good for your gut and your immune health. In general, your gut needs variety to thrive, which brings me on to some things that you can do to support your gut health in a way that isn't ultra wellnessy or boring. The first one is quite a simple thing, but eat complete whole meals that include protein, plants, and colour. Try and have as many whole foods in your diet as possible without it being boring. So thinking about having, whole protein sources, chicken, fish, tofu, I can't think of mince, whole protein sources, Greek yogurt, that are different protein sources, different foods in general, that are going to get you your protein in, but make sure you're also including a range of plant foods, vegetables, fruit, whole grains as well, so rice, grains, quinoa, things like that. Also trying to make sure that if you can, going for whole grain options rather than white options is a really good way to get a bit of extra fibre in your diet, but you don't have to be religious about it. If you enjoy white bread and you don't like seeded bread, have white bread, not seeded. Making sure that you're getting, plenty of legumes and things like that, beans and pulses in your diet as well is really, really important. Something that I encourage my clients to do all the time, and it's one of those things that whenever I recommend it, I feel it feels a bit weird, but it's incredibly beneficial, is getting some movement in after meals. If you find that you struggle with bloating, that you get quite uncomfortable after you've eaten, go for a walk after your meal. A 10-minute walk is going to improve digestion. It's also going to improve, it's also going to stimulate peristalsis, which is basically the movement of your gut, the kind of moving of food through your gut. And it's going to help manage your blood sugars as well. So getting 10 minutes movement after a meal is really beneficial. It's something that people used to do very traditionally, and I think it's become less common now. It used to be kind of a done thing, but definitely make sure you do that. Hydrate consistently as well. So much of gut health could be improved by just drinking more water. Water, it helps soften your stool, it helps support gut motility, it helps prevent that dehydration related fatigue that we think is because we've got low blood sugar, but actually just because we're thirsty. But getting enough water in. My clients are all have as a habit to drink 2 to 3 litres of water a day if they are kind of normally active, if they're being incredibly active, if they're running, if they're in the heat, we tend to up that to 3 to 4. But 2 to 3 litres of water a day, particularly earlier in the day, just hydrate from when you wake up. It's incredibly beneficial for your gut. And it's probably if oh my god, I can't speak. If you take one thing from this, it's to hydrate consistently. As I said before, digestion starts outside of the mouth. It starts with when you see the food and when you start to chew it. So sit down and chew your food properly. Don't wolf things down. Make sure you've swallowed before you take your next mouthful. Things like that have a huge impact on your gut health. Something that I say to everybody when it comes to food and how to think about food from a health perspective in general, but it particularly relates to gut health, is to think about what you can add to your diet rather than what you can take out. You do not need to cut out gluten, cut out dairy, cut out ultra processed foods. Keep those things in your diet if it is healthy to do so from a kind of medical standpoint, but focus on what you can add to your diet rather than what you can take out. So can you add more plant foods? Can you add more colour? So for example, I was having this conversation with a client recently. She was having a couple of biscuits as her afternoon snack. And I said, fantastic, have the biscuits. What can you add to that? Can you add some fruit? Could you add some protein? Could you have a couple of biscuits and some hummus and some veggies? And you've got a really nice balanced snack. Maybe don't dip the biscuits in the hummus, but you know what I mean. If we can add more diversity, we know that that has a huge impact on our gut microbiome and therefore our gut health. Another thing that is also incredibly boring, but in terms of gut health, prioritize sleep and stress recovery. Poor sleep has a huge impact on your gut. As we've said, when your body is under stress, it deprioritizes digestion, and lack of sleep and lack of good recovery impacts stress levels, which means that we will digest worse. So if you can prioritize getting a good night's sleep, and I will do a separate podcast episode at some point on good sleep hygiene for professional women, but if we can prioritize good sleep, that is going to improve gut health significantly. And as I said before, be regular. your gut has its own circadian rhythm. It has its own clock that it operates on. And if we can eat at regular times, if we can sleep at a regular time, if we can try to get some structure into our day, that's going to help regulate digestion, regulate appetite, and make your life easier. It's not about being religious with this though. What I'm not saying is you have to eat your meals at a certain time, but it's about having some consistency, eating every 4 hours, going to bed within a 2-hour window, waking up within a 2-hour window, keeping some structure in place so that your body learns what it can expect, and that gets everything a bit more regular. But I think the important thing to remember is that gut health doesn't need to be something you obsess about. It doesn't have to be your health and fitness identity. It's not about adding stuff in or like taking a whole bunch of supplements or expensive things. It's about how you live day to day. It's about just how you take care of yourself. Because the goal here isn't a flat stomach. It isn't about, being thin. It's about feeling comfortable, feeling energized, feeling in tune with your body. Something I think it's important to mention is that bloating is for the most part a relatively normal thing. Your body will look different after you eat than before. Your body will change in response to different foods. I know, as someone with IBS, that there are certain things that I eat where I have a disproportionate amount of bloating and that it is not a good place to be. There are certain foods that just I don't digest well. But after a lot of meals, I will have a degree of bloating. If I go out and have a 3-course dinner and come home with a little bit of wine with it, because if I'm having a 3-course dinner, I'm having the wine, my body will look different. I will be bloated. My tummy will look full. That's because I'm a human being and because food has to go somewhere and a bit of gas gets created and that changes my body. Having variation in your digestion and your gut is normal. Nobody is unless they eat very, very boringly, nobody has a gut that never changes. Everyone's gut flexes depending on what they've eaten, but also depending on what's going on in their life, their hormones, where they are in their menstrual cycle, etc. All of those things impact our bodies. The key from a gut health perspective is to try and keep some sense of rhythm, some sense of structure, some sense of normality. And rather than trying to add in a bunch of stuff or take out a bunch of foods, it's about getting the basics right, to be honest.